So hello Shelton, how are you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Hey Ritik, yeah, happy to be here, man. Curious on how this is going to go as well.
All right. So I know that you are a community builder at Stoa and you have built the community from the ground up. But
Hmm.
for the audience, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, man. I think so. For anyone who's listening or watching, I'm Shelton. I'm a native of Goa. I currently live in Bangalore, and I currently work at Stoa. I lead the community team at Stoa, and I also handle a bit of operations, a bit of back end of. But yeah, largely, I think most people know me as a community manager at Stoa.
All right. So, what's it like knowing that you have built one of the strongest communities out there?
Uh, I probably don't know that yet. Yeah, I mean, while I think we have I think we have a good community here with Stoa, but best one, I think yet to be seen, right? I don't think I can count my chickens yet. We've only probably been around for a few years, so while I know it is a good community, I think still probably have a long way to go. Like we just crossed 1,000 people, right?
Yeah.
We just crossed 1,000 people, which is quite a milestone. But then, yeah, my mind is already racing to like, okay, how do we run this at say 5,000, right? Like, and then how do we take it to 10,000? Like, what's going to happen then, right? Like, will it still be the same? How do we scale? Yeah, I appreciate the compliment of maybe it's being considered the best, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a great community. I think we have a lot of great people here. Um, I think folks are very helpful. I think we have a lot of diversity, especially from, people with just coming from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different parts of India. I've probably had in the last 2 years some of the most interesting conversations I've had in my life. Just heard some amazing, interesting stories. So yeah, I think we have a good community. Best yet to be seen, I'd say.
No, I think you are being humble. I had a conversation with Arun Biju, who was running
Huh.
community at my captain.
My captain, yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, it's one of the best communities out there because I know a lot of other community folks. And, even the amount of trust that we have built among cohort mates and
Hmm.
inter-cohort
Hmm.
fellows is insane. I can just message anyone and,
Hmm.
ask them for help.
Hmm. 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 I think that also has to do. See, I think some factor there is also probably the high ticket size. Like,
Mhm.
right? I think if people are putting down more than 3 lakhs, they probably have to. They are probably incentivized to do a little more with what they've been given, right? So maybe that's a factor I would say to consider here as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So Stoa's community motto, pride in your
Hmm.
craft, matches
Yeah.
with the theme of my podcast.
Okay.
The podcast theme is that art is uh, very you know the definition of art is very unrealistic
Okay.
as it is on the internet. I
Okay.
feel that art is not just limited to sculptures or paintings. It's
Hmm.
very wide and it can be applied to any field. Whether
Hmm.
you are doing finance, whether you are
Hmm.
cleaning the floor, you can
Hmm.
apply art to your life. And that
Hmm.
sort of
Hmm.
goes with the Stoa motto, pride in your craft, where
Hmm.
which you can actually expand on a bit.
Yeah. So see, I think for the longest, we've been thinking about what are the tenets that, you know, make someone a good business professional, right? Or just a good professional, right? In whatever field. And, and the store team also, I think there's a lot of values which are unarticulated that I think, that we believed in. I think, even before when we started Store, when we were thinking of ideas, when that initial team was working together, also as the team grew, we had really great people come in, right? We learned from them, collaborated. We learned from fellows, in those first few cohorts. And I think a lot of these tenets are something that we believed in, but fundamentally, like, that tag of like pride in your craft, fundamentally came down to okay, like let me put it this way, right? Like your career is likely the longest thing you do in your life. Um, on average, unless you win a lottery or unless you get that big break, which, just the most generally people don't, you'll be working for 30 years of your life, right? Let's say from the ages of 22, and luckily say you retire by 55, right? Like little more than, around 30 years of your life. Out of those, about 8.5 to 9 hours a day you spend at your job, which is most of your waking time, right? Assuming you're lucky enough to work Monday to Friday, not even Saturday, right? Like
Yeah.
you're lucky enough. And how do you and if you look at like a lot of the oldest professions that have been around, right? And a lot of this came from that idea of the craftsman, right? A craftsman, and just talking about this example of a carpenter has to, usually spends years and years learning how to do one thing really well, right? Whether it is a technique, a certain design, a certain mold. um I spent years and years just getting better at that craft, right? Just getting really skilled at that. And the idea is, how can you look at, especially in today's world, in like this era of knowledge workers, how can we bring back that same sort of, how can we bring that larger tenant back
Mm.
here? Right. And even ties down to those four values. So, those of you who are listening on the outside, if you never, you probably only know this if you join Stoa, so probably I'll talk about it. But we have four tenets which we consider in pride in your craft, right? One is like just being intentional. The right being intentional just basically is another way of saying attention to detail, right? Anything that you do, whether it is writing an email, sending a message to a colleague, right? Like how to just give that with consistent focus, consistent attention to detail, anything that you're doing in your work, right, like at the workplace, whether you're a freelancer, you're a founder, you're an operator, right, just putting that attention to detail, just being intentional about what you're doing, having that kind of focus on your work, right, not taking it for granted, right, whether it is a small task of sending an email or you're working on a big project plan, right. The other thing is respecting reality, right? Which is, respecting the iron law of the market, respecting just your limitations, respecting the limitations that already exist, right? Like, for example, like let's take the iron law of the market, right? If you build something, you could build the best product, but if no
Mm.
one wants to buy it, then probably, you're not going to make it. So why
Yeah.
build that, right? Like just understanding that you might have the best idea in the world, but if it doesn't contribute value to, or it doesn't add value to someone's life, likely that they won't buy it, right? Like just simple consumer behavior. But also respecting reality applies to, yourself as well, right? Like simple thing, right? You like if you try to work 18 hours a day for 5 days a week, you're likely are going to crash for 4 days.
Mm.
Yeah, right. Just respecting, understanding your own limitations and respecting that, understanding limitations from others, understanding things that are not in your necessary in your control, right, right, I think a lot of times, and I think we've all been there when we are young, right, having idealistic ideas,
Mm.
right. You look at like I think, I at least remember when I was in college, a lot of the debates that you have largely say around politics or around like world affairs, very idealistic in nature, right. Oh yeah, you should ban plastic outright, right? Which in concept, as a concept, sounds great because you're presented with limited information. You're seeing like, okay, plastic is bad, it causes pollution, etc. So the obvious thought is like, oh, ban plastic, but you don't realize how many jobs depend on that, right? Like how there's an entire market and industry that is a backbone. You can't shut it overnight, right? You have to take step by step measures. There is a patience game required. There's policy level decisions to be made. There are multiple stakeholders. Right, and that really is respecting reality, right? And as a business professional, like having a grasp or having that strong sense of reality is kind of, I think, what sets apart, good business operators from maybe the ones that are not so great, right? Um, the third tenant is tough love, right? Or radical candor, right? Like tough love here is again like not letting yourself off the hook and not letting others off the hook, right? If I have to put it
Mm.
very simply, whether that is being able to give feedback to a colleague or being able to receive feedback. Knowing, like I said earlier, sometimes respecting reality is about knowing your limitations. Tough love is also knowing when you're making excuses for yourself as well, right? Knowing when you kind of want to take the easy way out and kind of realizing that, holding yourself accountable, holding others accountable, and finally, it's about having fun. I think the
Definitely.
final tenet of pride in your craft is having fun. Uh, which is again, right, just going back to the thing of like your job is likely the longest thing you'll do in your life, right?
Yeah,
More than the time you'll, like, see, if you think about it, right, think about the other parts of your life. You If you're lucky and you grew up at home, you would probably spend the first 18 to 25 years with your parents, right? Like that's a relationship that you have. But after you're 20, you don't necessarily spend as much time with your parents. You're kind of discovering yourself, you're meeting other people, right? Say you do get married, or you do have a nice relationship at 25 to 60, right? That's probably the other longest thing you're doing in your life, right? Even when it comes to say raising a kid, your focus really will also be there for say 18 years, right? But your job, or what you do professionally, is the thing that will take up most of your life. And what's the point of doing that if you're not going to have fun, or
definitely.
if what you're doing you're not able to find ways to have fun in that? And it's not necessary that your job will obviously be fun. I think it's more about finding things to enjoy or find pleasure in the things that you're doing, right? Like in my
Finding art.
role, for example, right, in what I do, I would say probably 50% of the things I don't necessarily get like a very high dopamine hit of, right?
Hmm.
Or that high level of pleasure. But these are necessary things that I need to do, right? Like whether it is documentation, or writing down, say, creating email draft, right? But then there are other things in my role that I do get to have fun with, right? Like this, right? Like having conversations with people, learning new things, right? Getting different perspectives, right? Or even for example, like the meme channel that we have in Discord, which is a part of my job, right? It's crazy that one of the things of my job is like managing a meme channel on Discord, right? Like I think that's one. Oh, at induction, I find it absurd that I can say something that will make 100 people jump. I can give a command that make 100 people jump, or make them find joy in being silly. And those, I think, are the fun aspects, right? And I think going back to the whole tenet of pride in your craft, right? It's just a combination of these four elements. And again, right, I've kind of given my perspective, right, or sort of my own take on these four values. I think if you say speak to Aditya, you will get a slight variance of this, right? The same tenets, but his perspective from his experience. I think you talk to Raj, you will get again, right, like the same tenets,
Definitely.
but a different perspective on these four things. Yeah.
Definitely. Like you said, the meaning of pride in your craft or the Stoa's motto varies
Hmm.
from the individuals as well. And I
Yeah.
think art also varies from individuals as well.
Hmm.
So I wanted to understand your
Hmm.
perspective on art and what's your definition of art, if I may ask.
Yeah. So I think for me, art really is, I think I think I have two sort of models when I sort of have to try to say differentiate between art and content in general. Um, I think art stems from this place. So I think this it stems from expression, right? Whether an individual or a body has something that they want to express and share with the world without necessarily any intention of conversion, if that makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Like, whereas I think content is always kind of designed with a specific purpose. I can maybe make one, two interpretations of probably content, but that's usually very well defined. Whereas I think when it comes to art, and again, just speaking very broadly as a category, I think a lot of good art, a lot of great art, kind of is vulnerable in a way that it puts itself up for interpretation. Whereas I think content, you don't necessarily have that with it, right? And I think that's a good differentiator. When you're observing something and you're trying to understand whether this is content or art, that's kind of the lens that I look at, right? Like, because I could see a great ad, right? Like for example, you could make an ad in the style of say Christopher Nolan or Wes Anderson. But I know that when I'm seeing that ad, there are these great techniques to it, right? Like not doesn't take away anything from that. There's great technique, there's great storytelling, there's great craft in it. But I know exactly what it's trying to get me to do, right? It's trying to
Yeah.
sell me on an idea or a concept or a product or a service, right? But I think sometimes when you look at good art, it more evokes thought, or it evokes some form of interpretation on your end, which is maybe sometimes slightly ambiguous, which I
Hmm.
think is fine. I think that's one. And I think the other thing is, I think another thing, how I look at art versus again content, I think art needs to be observed to exist or to be considered art, right? It cannot exist in a vacuum. Whereas I think copy or content can exist in a vacuum. Content can exist and no one can consume it, and it will still be content. But art, if no one is there to consume it or observe it, I don't think then it's art. It can't exist in a vacuum, right? It needs to be seen. It needs to be felt. It needs to be touched, right? Um, right. You could write a poem and just keep it in your book, and maybe fine if you're the one who's written it, you can sort of have your own take that okay, this is art. I've written the best poem, but um, if someone else cannot say read that, observe that, and then find their own sort of connection to it, it can't really exist. It's hard for it, to exist. Like you only as an artist can probably call it art, but what is there for everyone else, right? Whereas, I mean, we've written drafts of copy and it lies in our folders. It will always remain copy, right? It will always have that intent or purpose, a very defined, very structured, defined thing, need for existence, where it will exist, right? So these are kind of the two, uh, at least my perspective, right? These are the two things probably a frame that I use when kind of thinking about these things, especially today, right? Like I think when you have so many things happening with AI, the whole thing, what's happening with copyright and IP laws right now. Um, I think the other day found this entire playlist of like Taylor Swift songs and even like Indian Bollywood songs like covered by Kanye West, right? And it's so absurd,
Yeah.
right? It's enjoyable, but then some part of it just it feels weird, right? It's this new thing that we don't fully understand how it's going to impact, like how we even think about the world, and also how we think about art, as well.
So we talk about publishing art and different sort of meanings around and our
Hmm.
application of art in life. So,
Hmm.
so you see that Christopher Nolan ad, sort of
Hmm.
Christopher Nolan style ad, but you know
Hmm.
that it's an ad. Uh,
Yeah,
so that's an application of art. And so how would you?
I would say that's more application of technique,
Hmm.
right? Okay, I'll give you an example, right? Like the end of Inception,
Hmm.
right? You were left feeling a sense of awe, confusion. What is going on? What does that mean? Right? The top is spinning. And if you went on the internet after watching that movie, people had so many different versions of that. You had groups of people who just didn't care and said like, that's not important, right? The top spinning at the end is not important. It's the idea that he goes back to his family. There's another thing that, oh, he's in a dream. That's not reality. People who are happy about it, people who are sad about it, people who are confused, people who want answers, right? And like that's an emotional response that you have to something, right? Like very strong emotion. It's occupying a lot of your headspace. But say when you watch an ad, say in the style of Christopher Nolan, right? What you're necessarily observing is you're observing technique more than anything, because that ad exists for a fundamental purpose. The purpose is not to tell a story. The purpose is not to communicate an idea, right? It has this very fundamental purpose of this product or service, or the call to action as such. Even if it's not explicitly selling it, it wants to plant that idea in your head, right? It's trying to it's using technique to create something that your brain recognizes. Your brain appreciates the craftsmanship that you're seeing, right? If it's in the style of Christopher Nolan, you're like, hey, I've seen this before. This looks familiar, right? Like this motif or this, certain style of this sequence, right? You're seeing the inspiration from it. So I think it's more about that technique um, is what is transferable, right? But it's one element about say what say say Inception is, right. It's one element. Like Inception is not art just because of the idea. It's this combination of 10 to 15 things that are gone in, from the technical work to the actors in it to the script to the way it's shot to the lighting to the music to the ideas, the motifs. That's what all combines together and makes it sort of this form of expression, this form of art, right? But what's happening when, say, you're making an ad of it, you're kind of unbundling certain elements of that. You're
Hmm.
taking maybe the technique and the style, but there are these other elements, and it's more a form of imitation as well, right? Like which, and I think
Hmm.
most art is often inspired forms of different forms of imitation as well. But I think the way I look at it, I think it's more like an adaptation of technique, and I wouldn't maybe necessarily in my frame I would look at it as just art, right? I would probably look at it
Hmm.
um being inspired by technique or being inspired by that to create something a little more tangible, right? I think when you see an ad, I think ads in general or content in general is a lot more tangible in nature.
Hmm. No, definitely makes sense. Now that we have talked about the technique of art, I wanted to
Mhm.
understand how you use your art per
Mhm.
se, and you know uh, to use that art and apply it to your daily life and make it a sort of come together in your work.
Uh, that's a good question, right? I don't think it's I don't think at least it's something that's necessarily always conscious or like a
Hmm.
conscious
Definitely.
decision. I think what happens over time as you practice something and you get better at it, it kind of demonstrates itself a bit naturally, right? And I think especially when you practice a certain tenets, or and I'm not just necessarily saying the tenets of pride in your craft, but I think over time, man, I don't think this is limited to just a business professional, right? I don't think it's
Yeah.
necessarily limited to any profession, but I think if you observe a lot of people who are generally well skilled or can do certain jobs well or can do certain things well, there's a pattern to it, right? And it's a lot of it has to do with very fundamental repetitions of certain behaviors, right? And very sort of basic tenets that people put into place, right? Whether it is, being focused for an hour, right? Like just sitting an hour at your desk and being able to write documentation. That I think is quite a skill. It's not something that is easy to do,
Definitely.
right? Whether it is trying to brainstorm ideas on a whiteboard, and especially when you're dealing with problems that don't necessarily have an existing playbook, just the frame that you can put a problem into and think of solutions, right? And not necessarily there'll always be perfect solution, but it's about making the least number of trade-offs or like impactful trade-offs on the sort of negative side, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that answers your question very clearly, but I think if I have to look at, I think it ties down to like very fundamental practices, really, right? Whether it is how you slot things in your calendar, what is your just mental model when you start your day or you approach work, right? I think I'm lucky in a way that I have a job where there is a mix of like creative work and very rudimentary work,
Yeah.
right? So for me, it's like, okay, how do I switch zones between this, right? Like being a community manager, you have to kind of conserve energy a lot, especially with people interactions, right? Otherwise, you don't want to drain your batteries, really quickly as well, because then your recovery times takes a long. You do have like a limitation on your social batteries. So how do you balance that energy out in terms of how many conversations you have a day, or how many times you interact with people? And then, okay, no, there are these things that I do have to get done, which is very, say, rudimentary, whether it is sending out emails or drafting processes or working on a problem. There's an upcoming project, right, which requires more structured approach to that, right? More rigid format or more rigid frame to kind of work on that. Whereas, say, when I'm interacting with the community, whether it's on Discord or one-on-one conversations, it's more free flowing, right? It is more improvisational, right? I think that's more the right word. There is just an idea of kind of what I want to get out of that conversation or that interaction, but it's largely left to kind of a bit of improvisation and serendipity of like, God, let's see what can happen here, right? Like another way, I think a new phrase, what I've seen for this kind of model on the internet is like, screw around and find out, right?
Mhm.
Just basically try different things, run experiments, try new things, right? So yeah, I think I'm not sure that answers your question very in a non-ambiguous manner, but yeah, I think that would be my answer.
No, no, it definitely does answer the question, and it gives a lot of deep perspective to think upon.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
now, so this podcast is actually a scam.
Hmm.
It's a way for
Uh,
me to talk to people that I really want to on the
yeah.
pretext of a podcast.
Yeah.
So now let's deep dive into community building.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. Sure.
so what would you say are the so I mean, let's start at the what's the need for the community for a business or for an organization,
Hmm.
especially we have seen that lot of organizations have started putting out community manager open positions, uh,
Yeah.
and just the importance of community has started to go up.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is inflated, if I'm being honest.
Hmm.
I'll 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 I'll, I'll talk about, like, just a very fundamental need for community, right? Um, and really it is to derive a sense of belonging for its members over shared meaning, right? And that shared meaning can be anything. Like that could be different things, right? Recently, and by the way, again, right, like, I don't think community building or community creation, I mean, honestly, while there's a lot of new age methods, a lot of things that we've seen evolve in the internet, a lot of like the fundamentals have of it have not changed, since we were Neanderthals and we just discovered fire, and we knew that, okay, we can group band together, the likelihood of survival will be higher, because we are in this very hostile ecosystem, and being together will likely survive,
Hmm.
right? Right from ancient civilization, the role of communities, I think, the jobs to be done for communities has largely been unchanged. I think techniques have changed, models around it have evolved, but um, I think, and I'll get to maybe the businesses part of it, right? And probably what businesses probably needed and what businesses probably don't. But um, I think community exists to solve that purpose of sense of belonging, right? For people to find their tribe, or find people, not necessarily things that they have in common with, but people that they can relate to, right? Either shared goals, shared missions, or even shared pains, or shared journeys, shared sufferings, right? Inherently, as humans, we seek belonging, we seek meaning, we seek to be connected with others, right? And I think in today's day and age, where you can be so many different people, right? You can be so many, like, you have so many options, right? I think that's what globalization has done, right? Like, sitting in India, I can relate to another country's culture and kind of adopt that into my own style. There are no virtual borders. There are physical borders remain, but virtual borders aren't there anymore, right? So and we are spoiled for choice because of that, right? Just like Netflix deciding what to pick, right? Whereas previously, when you're on cable TV, you just stuck with what you had and you found some value and meaning in that, right? Or if you didn't, you found something else to do, read a book or something of that sort, right? Like, same in school, because of the lack of resources in your school, likely you ended up playing a sport that, just on autopilot, right? And you either liked it, you either learned to like it, or you didn't like it and you went and did something else, right? Maybe played
Yeah.
chess, or went to the library, or picked up video games, right? I think now that we have a lot more choices, it's even more, we have a deeper hunger and desire to find someone who is maybe as weird, or as, uniquely interested in something as we are, right? Like, because I think that has the internet has allowed us to have very specific interests, very niche interests, right? Or even, I think we've discovered also a lot in the last few years that, okay, other people also share the similar pains that I do, which maybe people in my immediate vicinity don't, or can't relate to, or can't understand, right? And that fundamentally is the role of communities, to bring people together, create spaces for people to come together, to share stories, learn from each other, extract value, right? But fundamentally, it's about just bringing those people together, right? Creating just spaces where people can express that, or a space for people to indulge in that habit, or have discuss those ideas, or whatever it is, right? Whatever weird niche thing that is. Um, in today's business world, however, this now is become something to leverage, right? This concept of communities has become something to leverage. The same way attention, right? The same way attention
Yeah.
has a way, same way like advertising. It becomes something that brands, companies can leverage, not just to add value to their users or their customers, but also to acquire new users, to advertise, to make it a value-added service for maybe the existing product or service, right?
Mm.
Um, but I think where, but I think today businesses, not all businesses necessarily need communities. And I think that a lot of that ties back to kind of what is the persona that they're targeting and what is really the value addition that they're trying to solve. And also just understanding the customer and how much time do they have to give, right? Like, for example, I see a lot of, brands today who are selling, say, B2C products, try to start or launch communities around it, which always kind of makes me scratch my head a bit, right? Because I get communities after someone has purchased your product. These are forums, by the way. Forums have existed. Forums were just the OG communities of the internet. It's just that people didn't realize it, right? Like message boards, support boards was communities for people who use those product or services. And I think you will see this in the tech industry a lot. Like people who build PCs, right? People who build consoles, right? People who should try new hardware products, right? Like, if you go to this old forum boards of like say Dell, Apple, right? You'll see like those are like some of the older communities that kind of existed on the internet where people kind of just help each other. Reddit, right, for example, is a great example of this, even though it's not necessarily often termed as a community or community spaces. It is in a way one of the best communities, platforms to exist out there, and has, subreddits are some of the best communities you'll ever see, and I think people have a lot to learn from that. But I think right now, so I mean, I see brands, um, before the sale of a product, right? Like as part of their marketing strategy, they'll create a community uh, for potential buyers, right? It's a step in the funnel. Say middle of the funnel is, the community play. And um, and I think that distorts things a bit, because what I've observed is, especially in some of these sort of more marketing brand communities, is that oftentimes those power users of people who generate the most value or get the most value from the community are not necessarily the buyers of the product, right? Or don't end up necessarily converting, right? Or making that purchase or sale, right? And I think it kind of gives the wrong idea or the wrong impression that, I definitely think a lot of brands don't necessarily need community. They probably need more effective marketing strategies, right? In Stoa's use case, the having a community also was never initially part of the plan. It wasn't necessarily um, an intentional outcome. Like we knew we had to run an online community. I've run online communities before. And when we were starting Store, we knew that that would be a need, just having a community. But what we didn't expect is the community value that would be unlocked from bringing those people together, especially during the pandemic, and how people would help each other. And, like you said, right, be able to extract value, make friends, right? Like each person was taking probably 4 to 5 different things away from the community rather than just one thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's when we kind of got a lot more intentional around that community building aspect of it. But it makes sense for a place like Stoa, right? Uh, People are coming here for a shared, common goal, like which is whether it is to upscale, career transition. There are people from diverse backgrounds. There's a lot of value to be unlocked from people just learning from each other, right? And so it makes sense. And people have already paid,
Mm.
right? Like, it's not like a part of the community and then you decide to make a purchase and you start putting things like stuff. There's already a high ticket size, which is the barrier to kind of entry here, which, kind of makes my job easier, right? Because not necessarily I have a metric to chase in terms of community growth. I'm not trying to reach a wider audience, so to speak, right? Like maybe some things on the marketing side, yes, with what we'll try to do, maybe with the Instagram, things like that, maybe on reach. But my community is a gated community, right? It's on the inside. I'm not necessarily trying to chase conversion metrics, right? I'm not necessarily trying to convert customers. I'm not trying to get them to buy newer products, right? And none of these goals. My goal is to complement what is happening on the program and help people just unlock value at different stages, right? And if I have to put a metric, right, if I have to put a hard metric to this of what the role of community is, it fundamentally is retention. Because if people
Mm.
find retention and accountability, because if people find their friends, people find people that they can learn from, people find value, they're likely to stick around longer and likely will hold themselves more accountable, likely will more likely to complete the program, more likely to achieve their outcomes of goods, which then ties to our success as well, right? Because we are a young brand, we're 3 years in, and our success, our fellow success is our success, because that is what will keep our flywheel running, right? Which is also why we are doing this, right? Like we want to be that alternative to an MBA, want to be an alternative. Yeah, sorry, I think I went on a whole like
No, no,
tangent
no.
and two different points, but yeah, I mean, yeah, happy to follow that up with the questions.
So I think Reddit is one of the most underutilized community out there because
Hmm,
even I work in the creator space. There's a subreddit called Insta Celeb Gossip, and people
hmm,
talk about their opinions on Instagrammers of influencers, and people,
hmm,
influencers don't even realize that they are being talked about and
hmm,
don't even leverage that sort of information.
hmm, hmm,
So I think businesses are also that way, and I think going back to Stoa, a
hmm.
lot of it boils down to loyalty as well. If you see someone who has completed the Stoa program, uh,
Yeah.
even if they don't recommend Stoa for the content, they would say you should join for the community.
Hmm.
So I think that's a really big thing.
Yeah, and you see, think about it, right? It makes sense also in a way, right? Especially, see, I think when someone, um, puts in some sort of effort, like, oh, some sort of time in it, right? Like, there are people who've say not even done the program fully or completely, probably, and like there are people who disappear, right? Like that's another, like, and this happens at every institution, every place you'll go, any long like form learning program, is you have some form of churn, or like 5 to 10% of people will just disappear. um yeah, but I think that also has to tie to, kind of also the shared pains that not just people bring with themselves when they come into store, like, but also kind of what they go through in the program, right? Say even if you failed, you didn't make it the case weekend, but just that sitting till 4 a.m. with like two other team members and
Yeah.
just being fried and tired of arguing and figuring out the idea just to put something down and finally submit it. You've gone through like some form of shared suffering together, right? You bonded, kind of over that. At maybe the earlier in the evening, you all were probably at odds and just arguing about ideas and thinking you all will never get on the same page. And after all of that is kind of out of your systems, at the end of it, you're just two tired people who just care about something a lot and just want to do your best. Right. And you all have put in, work. And that's this shared feeling of not just suffering, but then also accomplishment. If you do get selected and get shortlisted, like those memories will likely last a lifetime, right? Just like in school, um, the things that you remember in school is when you and your friend got caught bunking, or when you and your friend both reached late for the exam and had to beg like the exam teacher or whatever to let you in the hall to answer, or you were eating in class and you got caught and you were trying to cover up for each other, right? You remember those moments, right? Like, because that's when you felt like you found someone, you had someone with you, you're not alone on this sort of journey, right? Or even the wins, right? Like when you win a college competition, when you work overnight on for a quiz and then you win it, right? These are the things that you kind of remember. And, even in the workplace, right? Like you might switch workplaces through your career, but the things that you remember are those really high and low points more than anything, right? Because those are the ones that kind of they change you in some ways as well, right? They push your limits, they kind of test you, and just to have someone along with you on that journey, and you're not doing it alone, just helps form that bond a lot, right? And that there's a lot of meaning and value in that. I think that cannot be quantified. It does a lot for the self. Like I don't think you can quantify that as some metric, or like even the individual can't put it on a scoreboard of like like, okay, this interaction is like higher up here than that. It just has a lot of meaning, that way, that shared sense of meaning. And I think that is what really people advocate for, because when someone says like, hey, you should join just for the community, what they are really saying, or in my opinion, is I would like you to find that same sort of feeling and magic that I did.
Hmm.
Right. I want, you should join here because you might find that same thing I did. And that's why people struggle to kind of also talk about like I don't think just Stoa, but I think any great community out there, a lot of people kind of struggle to translate the value to a person who's not been inside. Because unless you're inside, you don't necessarily know what really is going on. It might sound very voodoo and ambiguous outside, right? Like, especially when you have to put down 3.5 lakhs. And your son tell you, "Arey bhai, community must hai yaar." Like, you'll find your best friend. And in your head, you're thinking, "Arey, thoda yaar, I'm giving 3.5 lakhs to find my best friend," right? Right? You're not necessarily, you're thinking like, no, I want that, whatever, 16 LPA job. I want this charter certification. I want to become product manager, like, upskilling. Like, you think of all these very tangible kind of goals and outcomes. And then you have this guy who's telling you, bhai, like, wo chhod do yaar. Like, you'll find, your 3 a.m. friend. You'll find someone to go on a road trip with. And you're like, thoda yaar, I'm putting down money for this, right? And same with school, right? Or same with college. Like, you don't go into it thinking like, oh, I'm going here to make friends, or I'm going here to have fun. It's like, okay, take your parents are saying degree karo, chalo degree karna hai. Right. Or take it, this is my gateway of getting a job. Or, this is a process and I have to do this, right? But what you end up remembering is, those high points and low points, right? They kind of define who you become as you grow older. And if you think about it also, right? I think when you're an adult and then you start working, there are few spaces to kind of go back into that same mindset or that same kind of environment. Because workplaces are usually very structured, right? So I think people also see, that's why, you have people join sports groups, like suddenly you'll see people at 29, 30, start playing sports again, right? Or picking up a new hobby, start cycling again, running marathons. Maybe someone will get into meditation, maybe someone will get into a self-help group, someone will get into, say, a religious subgroup, someone will, get into a club, right? Someone you'll suddenly see picking up a new skill. Someone is doing motocross, right? Someone is going back to study again. Someone is doing Stoa. Someone is doing some other online program, right? Is because we are looking for the spaces also that we can kind of stretch ourselves, stretch our muscles, so to speak. Find make newer connections, find discover new parts of ourselves as well. Right. And I think that's really what community tries to solve, or what it solves for. And that's why it's as important as finding the right kind of community to join as well, right? Like, if you're someone outside looking for a community to join, it's also about picking the right one, right? Making that a conscious decision. Uh, yeah.
So, like you said, it's really important to find a right community, and sort of Stoa has the what do you call it, high ticket size to the community.
Hmm.
But there's a Dunbar number, 150, that is, which is
Hmm.
that beyond 150 people start to divide among themselves, and sort
Yeah.
of you have also kept the cohort sizes below 150, so
Hmm.
it doesn't go that far, uh, and it is still manageable when it comes to chaos.
Hmm.
But what do you think happens when that number crosses?
See, I think there are a couple of things that happens. I think as communities scale, or as the numbers grow. One is, of course, you have an evaporating cooling effect, which I think you can always delay, but I don't think you can avoid. What that means is that there will be not necessarily. I think defining it by a quality dip is not right. It's more like a dissemination of like topics, or just that diversity kind of thing of it, right? But I think there are different ways to go about it. So one great thing that happens as also community scale is you form subgroups,
Hmm.
right? Which I think is a necessary byproduct. You can't, I don't think you can keep, say, 500 people together on this one common thing in one common space. Like, that's chaotic. That will never work. Even if, say, only 50% of them, or less than 50% of them are active, right? So one great thing that happens is subgroups. The other thing, of course, that can happen is also the bar can drop, right? Like, where people start getting more alienated as well,
Hmm.
right? And this is where gatekeeping comes in, right? I know there are a lot of people who think like, no, gatekeeping is a bad thing, etc. I think it's necessary. It's a filtration mechanism,
Yeah.
right? You want to make sure that only people who are, say, aligned to certain, common values or common goals are making it into this system. And I'm lucky. I like, we have a, like, forget even this value system gatekeeping. Like, there's a financial gatekeeping that's there, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's this price point that's there, which is hard to get into, not counting our admission processes, etc. Right? which they evaluate on people's goals, etc., and things like that, right? But I think there are also other ways to kind of mitigate this problem in open communities, and that all depends on kind of how do you define the culture, right? And if you see, Reddit does a great job around this. You can't you can't really fool people on Reddit.
Hmm.
If you're a newbie there, you there are good mechanisms of credibility on Reddit, even though it's anonymous. You don't know who the person is, you don't know their name, you don't know where they're from, but it has created mechanisms of credibility and this positive sum games that if you're a new person, it's very hard for you to mess around and try to pretend to be something, say that you're not, right? You have to contribute hard value. You really have to help people out. You can afford to be a troll and that's your own segment, but you'll be sort of perceived that way. It's like clear distinctions, which is, I think, and this I think applies to a lot of the old forums. The first communities that I was a part of, when and I didn't even, again, right, like that frame of communities didn't exist for me that time. I just thought I'm having fun online. Was like forum boards of the bands that I used to follow in like 2010, 2011. And I was a lurker on these spaces because it was just just the quality of things of the people that were active, right? And just the way they cared about things, right, made me feel like always, oh, I am not ready. I'm not like, like this is a really high bar that exists here, right? And it took me a while to be able to then actively contribute there, right? And Reddit also has that, right? You'll see certain forums where you can't post, certain subreddits where you can't post until, say, you've commented and written on someone else's or given
Yeah.
feedback somewhere else. So contributed somewhere, or you have certain number of upvotes, right? There are good system mechanics in place. And this is why WhatsApp sucks, right? Like this is why any group in WhatsApp which has over 50 people is noisy, right? Just because that design doesn't really exist for it. Unless you're some sociopath who is not active, but you will wait and read 500 messages at the end of every night and then still not say anything, then that's like insane. That's like some insane form of entertainment you're deriving out of that, right? So that's why like things like platforming and tooling also, is important when your community scales, right? It may not be important or that big of a decision to make when you're starting your community, right? Like I think if you're trying to seed a community, sure, I think you can kick off things on a WhatsApp group, Discord, Slack, there's so many different tools, Circle, right? Facebook groups, right? And I think that decision also ties to like where are my members active, right? So for example, we are lucky we can get people onto Discord, right? But I think if we were a free open community, it'd be really hard to get people onto Discord and
Yeah.
get them active, or say even dropping the introduction, right? I like if you were say running an open community, you have to have a few more rules. You have to that culture building needs to be a lot more regulated, right? You have to have a tighter structure in those kind of open forums or communities before it kind of gets very chaotic. Um, or very hard to say manage, right? Uh, yeah. I mean, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. So before even starting a community, like you said, there's a pseudo community where people
Yeah,
think they are a part of community and मतलब, try to come together. And then
yeah,
there's chaos, and then
yeah.
there's you know uh, sort of emptiness feeling, and then
Hmm.
that all three come together and form a community. So could you explain a bit what these stages?
Yeah, so I mean, see, I think, I'll put it this way, right? Like, say, anyone who's listening, or say, even if you have an idea to start a community, right? And say it's not like gatekeep by some product or service that you're, say, trying to get people. You just want to start an interest-based community, for example. Before even like creating a WhatsApp group or anything of that sort, any space for it. First thing is you yourself find, do you have 5 to 10 people that you spend probably more than an hour with talking about those things? And do you feel a need like, I'm having the same conversation here on this chat as I'm having with that other person there? And wouldn't it be better if like just all three of us were in the same room together? Like forget group, right? Like you're just think about, right? If three of us were in the same room together, what could happen? Like, would we all be vibing along the same way? Right. And the way to test that is, are you having that level of intense individual conversations with them? And does that person also probably have one other person and is being like, hey, yeah, like come to my place, or hey, I would like you to introduce you to XYZ person because I think he also, has deeply cares about this problem, right? Like that's more interest based. That could be also pain based, right? Like say for example, you're just like you met someone online and they're purely an anonymous introvert, but you just care about, say, manga, right? And you can talk hours and hours over that. And that other person also has a group, right? And what you do is then you try to sort of bring these people together. You try to come together because like, okay, we likely would have more fun, or likely there's something interesting that could happen if all five of us were in the same room, right? That's the first way to think about it, right? Like, just if you want to do this as an experiment, you want to do this as fun, and you just kind of want to test your skills, right? Like, bring five into active people who care or are passionate about the same thing as you in a space, right? Could be sports related, could be related to, say, a TV show, a movie, or some common interest, right? And then preferably something that's at least if you're trying to again experiment with this, think of something that someone can talk about at any point in the day. They don't necessarily have to sit and focus and think about it, right? Like, so think about interests, right? Like sports, politics, news, startups, whatever, right? Then you got to think about, okay, where is the space I want to bring people together? Now, if all your conversations are happening on WhatsApp, and then you're thinking about, but if I create a Discord server, we'll have threaded discussions.
Hmm.
Getting those five friends to install an app and download, because again, they're not paying you for this. They're not paying you to be here. This is like kind of just out of self-interest, right? Generally, that's there. So you want to reduce the friction of bringing people together as well, right? And where do you bring people together? Right. And this is again just to kind of experiment and start. Now, the thing, the tricky part is, right, once you do kind of understand a need, is that value addition, right? Or what is that needle moving thing to have? And this is the business aspect, or this is more that goal aspect that needs to come if you want to form a serious community. Like, okay, we are coming together. What, like, it can't just be to banter and discuss, because then that just becomes a group chat.
Hmm.
If we have to become a community, what we need to have some shared mission or some shared goal that we're coming together, right? That is larger than ourselves, larger than our individual selves, right? And that could be maybe, we want to we want to build like a meme brand together. We want to just create some shit post internet thing on Twitter. We want to build a company. We want to build a product. We want to learn from each other, right? Like very interestingly, I mean, if I could share an anecdote, right? Back in cohort two, so I don't like, I don't know if you know this, but cohort 1 to 4, I also used to do admissions as well.
Oh.
Admission interviews, right? And I used to enjoy that a lot, because pretty much every day I was having three new conversations for about 30 minutes with different people, and these are all people applying to Stoa. And I used to do, and of course different processes, but at one point, like one of the stages, either the first or second stage or eventually third stage, would be a one-on-one interview with me, and for a first four cohorts, right? And there was this guy that I was talking to, and he was in like the art and music scene in Bangalore, and he didn't necessarily apply to Stoa. He got referred, and we contacted over WhatsApp. And we were just talking. He's asking about what is Stoa, etc. What you guys are doing, and I was just asking him, hey, what do you do? And he was, I think, around 28, 29. He a really cool dude, musician, ran events like in the events and kind of the music scene in Bangalore. And I was asking him, like, how do you learn, right? And he was also part of different, like, he ran also a community for like artists, ran a, his sort of company that he ran, which was like an event company, was more collective of people. It was basically community driven, right? And he was telling me about how he has a group of four friends, and every 3 months they decide to learn something new together.
Hmm.
They don't join any program. They like, and all of these guys are his age. They're all really smart. They all know how to learn well, right? That's what they're great at. They know how to learn new topics. So every 4 months, one of the guys will pick something new to learn, like how to build a website. How they'll learn about AI. They'll learn about ancient history. They'll learn about Greek philosophy. They'll learn about digital marketing. They'll learn about marketing strategy. They'll learn about product development, whatever it is. They will, one of them will decide like one topic for those 3 to 4 months. One guy will, and what they'll do is they'll curate resources, they'll design their own curriculum, and they'll implement. And just four of these, four, five of them on the group will learn.
Hmm.
They'll have weekly checkpoints or weekly touch points. And then they'll give themselves a project to some level to test them, or they'll try to get someone external, friend, a colleague, or someone to, sit with them and do a call and kind of evaluate them.
Hmm.
Which is
That's
one of the most brilliant things I've like, I was like, this is such a brilliant like use case of the performance. Right? All your, it's a tight group. Everyone has similar motivations. Everyone is aligned. Everyone has a common goal that they want to accomplish. The goal is achievable. There is a timeline. They achieve that goal. They move on to the next one.
so actually I was, interesting that you mentioned this. I was actually talking to one of the show community members. His program just ended. So
Mm,
right now he's waiting for this my final project. And at Stoa, you sort of form teams of 4 or 5 people,
mm,
and he and his team have started learning Bubble on the side,
mm,
and they get on
mm.
calls every day.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I know these guys. Yeah,
I think that's really brilliant. Uh,
yeah, and that's value unlocking, right? Right, that's a great way to leverage. I think what most people forget when it comes to building communities is you as a community manager, you're not the center of it.
hmm,
The center is the people, and your goal really as a community manager, your goal for bringing people together is that almost of um, how do you manipulate, how do you warp reality or warp this thing that people are into that they can extract value, but it ties to them putting effort.
hmm,
So how can they put leverage? Because successful communities are communities where the people who give in are the ones who usually end up getting the most out of this. And you've also seen it, right? Like I've seen you being active on, the Help Me Out channel or even on introductions, right? And a great way to build your personal brand,
yeah,
great way to get recognized, great way to, like not necessarily keep track of how many things I moved, right? Like tomorrow, you also know that say if you ask a small question somewhere, 5 people who maybe you've not interacted with will likely reach out to you because they know that okay, we say like help others.
yeah,
Right. And others also do that as well. And that's really, that's really like something that is amazing that happens. Right. Or that is like that high point of value extraction from a community.
hmm,
Right. And it's a lot of it is about leverage. So even right, I see a lot of branch day, and that's why I see a lot of frustration also among community managers when a lot of times when I meet community managers that are working, say, for influencers or for even like brands and marketing, which are more on the funnel side, where they get really exhausted on like what to measure.
hmm,
Oh, because the people who are say power users are not necessarily the ones who are converting or buying products. There are people who are enjoying that community experience, but are not necessarily the ones converting because they don't need that product or service. I'm seeing people who build communities which is alien from their product or service, which doesn't make sense because it's like, no, we'll put people together and they'll find some way to extract value out of each other. And someone is asking for a music recommendation, someone is asking for a PG, someone is asking for this, someone is asking, someone is discussing politics, someone is discussing. There's n number of things happening there, and there's no focus. And then people start, treating it like any group, right? Like or any uh group, like a generic WhatsApp group say that they are part of, right? Like those are not necessarily communities, right? Um, and people are doing this because like it's been a buzzword, I think, the last few months, and I think there are
hmm,
few brands and communities who've done a good job of building kind of good propaganda around this in the market. I'm not saying necessarily it's a bad thing, but
yeah,
I think what it does is, it kind of leads people asking the wrong questions. So, for example, anyone who's sitting for a community manager interview, the question I tell them to ask the founder or anyone whoever they're speaking to, hiring managers, what is the role of community in your organization and what is the problem it solves?
hmm,
And if that answer doesn't tie into, the product or service that they're trying to sell, then maybe it's not the like you likely will be doing more customer success or kind of a customer, facing role there.
hmm,
Which is more to do with like support, success, or operations rather than actual community building or community value creation or community design or things like that.
Hmm.
right? Of course, community I think has an integral role to play with marketing and brand, but not, but it's through like interdepartmental symmetry, not necessarily just by itself. Right. So even at Stoa, right? Like we need to again, right? Let me just break down like one of the things that we do, right? Like we need to generate user generated content. Our marketing team needs user generated content um because people who are prospecting Stoa want to know more about the stones that are there rather than
Yeah.
what we are saying as a brand. Because for them to evaluate Stoa, they need to know that okay, who are the people coming here? What are the success stories? What are their own customers talking about? Right now the marketing team will then say come to me or my team, and they'll be like, okay, this is, we need to get user generated content, we would like to get more people talking about store on their socials, right? That's kind of the goal that they have, right? Like now I take this and I'm like, okay, if I just put a message and say, guys, we'd like you to post on socials on LinkedIn and here's some bounty for it, right? Like that is one way to go about it, right? Probably the easiest way to go about it, right? Like just ping 10 people and say like, hey, here's some voucher and here's something, and please write about this, write a testimonial here somewhere there or not, right? Like that's the easy way, that's the shortcut way of doing it. And I don't think a lot of those testimonial whatever people write would be authentic,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Because I'm not thinking of it from that lens, right? So when the marketing team comes to me with this problem, I'm immediately thinking, okay, how can I get the community to do this, or members from the community to do this, where they also can extract value from doing this as well, where
Hmm.
there's something in it for them. How can I align the incentives here? Right. And then, so that's what I need to think about, and then go back to those folks and, make them and uh, design it in a way that not just my marketing team is getting something out of it, but these folks also feel empowered by it. Right. So
Yeah.
I'll go to the person who say never written on LinkedIn and be like, hey, this is a great way to start and I'll help you. Right. And if, this is a great way to start LinkedIn, because what will this help you do is people look for store. If you write about store, likely they'll connect with you. This is a great way to build your kind of external network. And since that's something you're stuck. For people who are already building a brand, this is like, hey, additional content that here again, this is an option. Would you like to write about this? Oh, also, we would be sharing it from our account. So that likely will grow. So, right, that positive sum, bringing that symmetry between both these teams or both these departments, right? And aligning them, right? Like for example, even like on the community front, like we have to like I have to collaborate with my admissions team, say so, right? My admissions team will come and ask me like, hey, there are people from XYZ profiles prospecting Stoa, and they would like to talk to some existing Stoas, right? And this is one of the most amazing things I think at Stoa, right? Like those people who have gotten value of the community, I feel like I don't even need to push them or nudge them. I'll just be like, hey, folks, something like this is happening. And immediately there'll be five people who'll be like, yeah, this is a way for me to give back.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, I think, when, that I think is the role of community in organizations, or more like from that business sense. The role of a community manager is not to necessarily directly do customer support, necessarily directly do marketing, but uh, be that person who enables a lot of these functions or these collaborations to happen much better with your customers, right? They are not necessarily just a connector between the customers and these teams, or your users and these teams, but they are that Sherpa. I think that's the right word, right? Like they're that Sherpa, they're that sort of guide, or that person who's like, let me find shared value here, let me create a win-win situation for both groups around this. Right. And I think that's the best role I think communities can play, or community managers can play in business. And that's why I go back to a lot of businesses and ask that question like, do you even need a community? Maybe you need a forum. Maybe you just need a better social media presence. Maybe you need maybe a social media community, right? You maybe need a wider Twitter group or wider Instagram circle. Maybe that's where maybe putting all the people interested in your product into a common group may not be the best answer. Because then some of those goals don't even align with what your brand goals are, what your business goals.
Hmm. So, you
Yeah.
mentioned something about businesses measuring the
Yeah.
impact of their communities.
Yeah.
It all boils down to the life cycle of a community. So if
Life cycle of a community member also. I
hmm,
think that's a bit more important, not just the community. I think your community can go through different journeys. Like
yeah,
for example, the community journey I'm going in right now with the store community is very different from the pandemic, for example. It's very different for cohort, now where we kicked off cohort 12 to when we started cohort 9. right? Things are changing, whether it is, the events we do, or just the overall community design, what we try to do. It evolves as it grows. You've seen the things that we're trying to do offline, online, right, in different spaces. Um, so I think the thing to think about is what is your community user life cycle. So,
Hmm.
for example, if uh, again, if your role of community is to eventually, upsell or, convert a customer into buying, like, that's a great way to sort of measure your community members' life cycle, right? Like, okay, when do they join the community? Okay, how long since they joined the community till they made their first purchase? How long between the first purchase to the second purchase, right? Second to third purchase. Or referrals, right? That's another way of also kind of measuring community value, right? For especially like when that community is again part of your sort of marketing function, right? On the funnel side of it, right? Like those are probably better things to measure, right? Like
Hmm.
how much is your community like member? How often do they talk about your brand on social? Is the right like are they eventually becoming sort of like a brand ambassador on their own, right?
Hmm.
Organically, an advocate, sorry, not ambassador, but an advocate for the brand, right? Like on socials, like, an attribution I know is a hard thing that every marketer like tries to. It's one of the hardest thing to crack on the marketing side of things. But, and yeah, so I would say, see, that's one way, right? Like I think the way also B2B companies approach community also, I think, is very interesting as well, right? Like for example, I use I'm part of many SaaS communities for like SaaS products that have built like community platforms. Usually they also have a community for all the community managers that build their platform, which I find very interesting because for us then there's a lot for us to learn from each other, more grow, and we are using this common tool. So there's a lot of value kind of to be unlocked there. And there I think it's very easy to measure, right? Business goals, right? Like because if I'm there, at what tier I am, right? If how can they help me grow? Because if my community grows or their tool is able to allow my community grow, that means I'll end up using that tool more. Right? Or other B2B tools as well, right? I don't mean just like those community tools that exist like for
Hmm.
Discord or analytics and things like that, right? Dashboarding and all. Um, so you see, I think you see a lot of it depends on the business, right? I think people who are thinking of starting communities around their businesses, they need to sit down and have a hard thought. Like sometimes it might not be something that they need to start with immediately and probably kick in 1 2 years after product market fit, or after they cross say 2,000 customers, maybe, right? It could come at different points in the business life cycle as well, or the product offerings as well. I'll share an interesting anecdote that John Danner told me. He's one of the investors at Stoa,
Oh.
and before we had Stoa, he was one of our sort of advisors as such. He was kind of helping us out. He's been in the education space in America as well. And I was doing a podcast with him at that point, I was recording one. And I don't know if it was on the podcast or after it, and we were just chatting, and he shared this story. So, um, uh, this was, I think, in the 80s when he was growing up, and some one of these cities in the US. I can't remember. I think Oklahoma or somewhere on that side. And he had an Apple II system, right? And this was like I think in the 90s maybe or late 80s, where not many people owned computers or were on the internet, and he would try to find other people who also had Apple devices, right? And they would kind of get try to find other people who used Apple systems, Apple computers, so that they could learn how to use, like, okay, what shortcut do you use? Okay, what hack do you use? Or where do you use documentation? Or what games do you play, etc. Right? And they were on the forums, and this was not a play by Apple at all. Apple was agnostic to, they had no like very little clue that this was happening. And what started happening in the city, I think that a neighboring city overseas, is people decided to gather once a year. All these people who used Apple products would come with their, like monitors and, CPUs and their system and, the UPSs, and come there and they would set up and, whatever, they would talk, they would see other systems, okay, how they modified it, stickers that they put, color changes, okay, what programs are they running, how they're using it differently. And they would meet. And eventually, he was telling me year on year, that grew. The audience, they grew. It went from 100 to 200 to 300 people started coming together.
Hmm.
And it grew so big that it got Apple's attention. And then Apple started coming for those. Like Apple started sending teams for that to see what was happening. And that fundamentally over time became the Apple's conference that they have.
Yeah.
Right. And it started from their customers doing it.
Mhm.
Customers were trying to kind of solve a need for themselves, that they wanted to meet other Apple users and meet and just discuss and hang out and have a few drinks, or just get to know who are these other people, right? Just because they use this product that maybe many people in their current circles didn't use, right? And Apple then adopted that as part of their strategy, where they started doing more conferences. They started bringing these conferences to different cities, and now like an Apple conference is like a massive like global event almost,
Yeah.
right? When they do like a product launch. But yeah, when I heard this, I was just mind blown, man. Like I was like, wow, that is such an amazing organic sort of, forming of, community, right? And you didn't have a community manager. You had probably some people who helped organize it. Maybe Apple hired them. I'm not sure about that. Right. But just like people just serving a need for themselves that didn't exist, right? Just high agency, taking initiative, right? And yeah, I mean, I think that also is, like your product or service could have that happening organically as well, and you might not know it,
Hmm.
right? uh,
So you know what?
could
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I mean, it also could happen in a negative way also. I realize, like, you would have groups
Yeah.
of people shitting on your product, right?
Hmm.
uh, that also could happen, yeah.
So what's the sort of a, would you say, a framework or a method that you use to engage the community and
Hmm.
to also control the chaos in the community? So because I have never
Yeah,
seen, someone saying a bad thing about the community, maybe because it's a high ticket size and they want to derive the value. Uh,
yeah.
but because you
maybe
have
maybe i'm de-
guidelines
maybe
in
I'm deleting the messages also.
hmm.
No, I'm kidding, I'm not that.
No, no, no. So you have guidelines in place, and I have also seen
Yeah,
myself enforcing
yeah,
those guidelines,
yeah,
without being a Stoa team member, just
yeah,
because I want to keep the peace of the community. So how how
yeah, yeah.
how have you sort of done that?
So see, initially when we started, right, and I think this is like a, I'm quite thankful to say Raj and Aditya also being around when we were starting the store community, because I'm someone who uh, has a very what do you call it? I'm a rules guy. Like I'm a rules and guidelines guy, like for anything. Like, when we're planning induction, first thing I'll write down is like the things because I think about the worst case scenario.
Yeah,
So even when I'm planning induction, I'm writing like, okay, no alcohol, no this, no that, right? No harassment, right? Because I'm thinking more on those lines, right? And same way when we were starting the server community, I think my immediate thought was more on those lines. Okay, let me just have rules and I'll create just these few channels. And I remember Raj was Aditya, I think mostly, but it was Raj was like, let's just see what people do,
mhm.
right? Like, don't try to create too many frameworks because no one's even in here yet, right? Like, how do you know even these rules or these frames are the right ones for even what will happen? I remember I'm paraphrasing, but fundamentally the conversation TLDR was like that when we were starting Store. And I was like, I kind of pushed back against it. I was like, I don't know, man. Like, what if people do this and that? And he's like, take it as it comes, right? Because it's a small group. Our first community, like, when we started Store, our first two cohorts were just less than 100 people, right? Like 25 was the first cohort, and I think 80 was the second cohort, right? And second cohort is really when the community started taking off, really, right? And cohort one is when we just started the Discord say server. And so we did that, right? Like we did that. And I remember, like, initially we thought like, okay, this is a business community or like B school. So let's have, product marketing, all these kind of channels, learning things and all. And something that we found out in the first month, like all those hypotheses were like wrong. Like I was wrong about my rules thing. So great that Raj like pushed back on that. And whatever was like most of these channels that we thought of were very serious, where we thought like people would engage, people didn't engage. Right. Or, ironically, like people start just posting memes on different channels. And then we're like, oh fuck, like memes is going to be a huge thing. And then we created the meme channel, which till today is the most active channel. Every day, that channel I know push, so like people will
Yeah,
post five things. It works in the, like, there is a distribution curve over there, like of high quality, low quality and all, but it is active
yeah.
continuously. And so that is what I will tell people, when, now I tell people when they're trying to start a community, which is think of that core reason of why you want to bring people together. Have one, two basic fundamental rules. So, like, one great rule that I have, which I've always had, is you have to drop your introduction to get access. That
Hmm.
is a hardcore rule, right? Because I don't want random strangers. You suddenly people you were replying to someone and no one knowing who the hell you are. They can't find out who you are,
Yeah.
right? So that was like a hard rule. Hey, you have to drop a well thought out intro to get access, right? That's a so those are the rules, those are the like. So I would say anyone who's starting community, right, don't go over into too many rules because your initial group kind of decides what the culture will be of the community. And you
Hmm.
don't know that until you bring those people together, what the culture, if you might have an idea what the culture is supposed to be, but just like how you can have a business idea, but then market reality is different. So same rule applies here. You might have an idea of what kind of community and what are these big ambitious goals you or culture you want to set, but really you need to co-create that with your first set of users or first set of community members. They are the ones who need. So that's why you need to be very careful of who do you pick to join your initial community, and that's why you likely want to have very high intent people who you can hold accountable because they will decide what the community culture is going to be as you then bring in new members. They are the first ones who are going to engage with people. They're going to decide what is cool or not, basically. Right? Like they are going to decide what is interesting or not. They are going to be the taste makers. So you need to be very careful how you pick that. And after and the rules need to then be iterative based on what you see observing. Because some things may work great for 50 groups, but once you start reaching 100, maybe that context gets lost. So maybe you then might have to add another, you need to iterate on a rule same, right? And same with channels, right? Or same spaces that you want to create. Observe what people are talking about because that you might like, for example, I think we created like entrepreneur space or founder space. I remember in
Yeah.
quad one because we had like 5 entrepreneurs in Stoa at that point, right? In our first quad, I think 4 5, and we thought like they will chat here. None of them chat. Like maybe few messages or some articles linked, but everyone was chatting on the lounge and listening to music every day. And then we're like, okay, a lot of people seem to like music. Chalo, like, there's a lot of demand for this. Let's create a music channel. And then let's create this Stoa radio where people can come and hang out and listen to music. Right. Like, so you have to observe a lot of that initial behavior, and that really is those set foundational stones of what you want to build a community on top of that, or what
Hmm.
you add on top of it. Right. So that is one thing I'll tell anyone who's trying to build a community, right? Like, uh, you know, gatekeep initially very hard. Try to filter out for high intent members because those people are going to set the culture of your community. Try not to be too restrictive in your initial community design, right? Have maybe only 1 2 hard rules, maybe, and just a few spaces. Don't try to create too many spaces either. Then observe what people are interacting or what people are engaging on. Where are they deriving value? What are the common requests the active users are telling you? Like, hey, I want this, I want this, I want this, right? That will kind of dictate. And of course, you need to have those, you need, at least initially in those days, you need to treat yourself as a member as well. Like you
Yeah.
need to have the
Definitely.
same excitement as other members have. Because if you're trying to be like this class teacher, trying to control everything, like you're always going to be perceived that way. So you also have to be active as a member, engaging, bantering, not having those kind of boundaries and making people feel comfortable in those at least initial days. And then you can build your rule sets on top of that. Then you can have more moderation or more rules, guidelines based on what are the things you don't want happening in your community, right? Or what are things that you think would break the community experience for people. That's how you need to think about it, right? Like when it comes to rules, like what are things that will break? So, for example, Stoa, one of the rules I have is no politics at all,
Yeah.
right? No political discussion because you will never reach any level of consensus. You have polarizing opinions, and I feel like and it's my general opinion that I think oftentimes politics, when people discuss politics, is more you are creating barriers. You are not necessarily coming together. You're kind of, you're not trying to get people on the same idea, and especially because it's a cultural sort of phenomena in India, right?
Yeah.
So people have other spaces that they can have, and you're in India, you will always have some group where you can discuss politics. That doesn't need to happen at store, right? That's one of my rules, right? Privately, TK, you want to discuss with someone, go ahead and discuss, but not on any of my communities. Like that's another hard rule I have, right? Like, uh, no, no NSFW or like sexist humor, right? Or, any humor on like race, gender, things like that, right? Like, because those are just like, I mean, you're punching low if you're going to create humor about that, right? Like, keep the humor, keep those jokes in the context of business, right? Of this ecosystem you're part of. Because you're also going to ruin your personal brand by trying to do that. Because that's not why people are here. Again, you have other spaces that exist in the world that you can find that kind of thing, right? You can have your own WhatsApp group so you can make those jokes like that, but here's a space not for that. This is a space for them. So those are the kind of iterative things you have to have. And I think you need to have, four to five core fundamental hard habits. Um, and then in terms about, engagement and things like that, I think the thing there is like rituals, right? Like I think you want to have rituals that are predictive in nature, because people want to have, you know, that cadence of like, okay, like we have like every Wednesday community night, right? Like every Friday there might be some fun thing on Discord or cafe, right? And every month you'll have a mixer, you'll have like a fireside, you'll have some workshop on the community side, right? Like you'll have that social hour, you'll have those music sessions, right? Like so having rituals is very important, right? And you start off with maybe one, two rituals, and then you build it on top of that. Like so even Go team
Yeah.
on a weekend class is a ritual. It's the thing that brings us all together. So you need like rituals are also to remind or to give that high touch point of, okay, hey, we're all in this together, right? We're all on the same page, we're all part of this, right? We're all part of this one community, this one group. It's also for that reminder. So anyone again, I think is trying to build a community. Think of like, what is that one small ritual you want to have that has a repeated cadence? Could be once a week, once a month, wherever it is. Depends on your touch points that you want to have. But rituals then tie kind of into engagement, right? Like, based on the community you want to, try to create, right? Or you want to try to drive. And also, as much as rituals are necessary, you also need to optimize for serendipity, which means like you need to have some chaotic moments here. You need to kind of change the status quo once in a while, right? Like, because people also then kind of get bored. So they also are looking for something exciting or brand new, right? So you have to have those things that you do that, just wake people up or are very different from what they are kind of used to, or the habit they've fallen in, right? Like some new kind of event, new kind of experience that you can introduce, something that's very chaotic that wakes everyone up, right? That also I think is needed. I would say. So for Stoa, I try to do that every quarter or every 2 months, right? Like that one kind of that, and that can be like a house quiz, or that's like maybe some giveaway, right? Or like some meme competition will be there, right? Like some random, out of left field, like thing to that people can kind of just distract themselves into, which is out of their normal. I think that also is kind of another thing.
So actually, now that you mentioned this, let chaos happen. मतलब you didn't get into, but I am a very political person. So
Hmm.
at the because it's an important part of life actually, for me at least.
Hmm.
So at the induction, I had a political discussion, and that went in the wrong way.
Hmm. Hmm.
And till from then, I have never had any political interaction. If I
Yeah.
see someone having a political interaction, I will tell them, no, bro, you
Yeah.
don't do that. You don't.
Yeah. Don't know. Yeah. Man, I think because I think when it comes to politics, especially I think in recent times, I think that nuance of having, non-polarizing this conversation around it is very hard. And I think
Yeah.
people have very different perspectives and takes on it. So it's a very tricky ground to cover. You don't know, maybe that you later trigger point for someone or offend someone.
Hmm.
Because I think in India, it's like it has always been one of those polarizing things. I think it will remain,
Definitely.
until we kind of that I don't know if it will ever like mellow out. I hope it does at some point. Uh, you know. So yeah, I think you want to avoid. I think when creating a community, you want to avoid things that drive people apart, conversations that drive people apart, right? But I think there's a soft ground there. Like for example, I think food, you know, is something that drives people apart, or we have people have a polarizing opinions, but in a good way. Like you
Hmm.
can have people talk hours about biryani, but they'll not hate the other person. Like
Yeah.
you won't necessarily hate someone's values or something. You won't really judge them that level. Right? Like you might poke some fun or sound like being like, "Arey veg biryani kya hai?" But then that person will be like, "No, no, no. These are 5 reasons why veg biryani is a thing." And the other people like, "No, no, non-veg hai." And like you can have anything, or different, like the argument about cuisines of like who has the best street food, right? Like I think these things that are interest, right? Like hobby way that people can that move them, right? I think are great things to drive conversations with people, right? Like I was actually talking to someone yesterday also about kind of rituals or these things about breaking the ice, and I think childhoods, right? Like that upbringing, right? Like, I think in India, we have gone through similar pains growing up. It might have been but at different capacities based on, your privilege and how much you want to, which parts of India you grew up in, tier one or tier three or whatever. But some tenants have, we have similar pains growing up, right? Like we have similar experiences. Summer holidays, right? Going to a new class in the monsoons, like June, July is when usually everyone's school has started, new semester, new year has started, and we've all had to buy an umbrella. And last minute we forgotten to buy an umbrella, or buying notebooks before semester is going to start, right? Like we've all like almost every Indian has gone through this similar kind of experience. Right. And that's something that we all have different perspectives on, but the experience, so fundamentally, it is very similar. And I think that makes for great, interesting conversations, right? Like, those comfort foods that we have had, like, the foods our moms made of us for us when we were sick, right? We've always had that one food, but for me, it's a different food. For you, it's a different food. But we can like have like probably an hour conversation just around that, right? And bond just around, those shared experiences that we've had, or just learning from each other's experiences, right? I think so, because I fundamentally believe that everyone has interest, like a story, right? Like there is some, we've all gone through similar life path, but in our own ways, and there's probably always something sound insightful, someone will have to share on their life stories. So I think that's also another great way of kind of seeding those conversations, seeding those discussions with when you're trying to form a community, right? Like, and this is more support, this is more ancillary, like these interest-based topics, right? Like, you still don't need that core reason of why everyone is together, right? Like,
Yeah,
okay, right, take it. We're here to get fit. We're here to get six packs after
definitely.
2 months, and we're here to hold each other accountable. We are here to do Stoa because we want to, get a career transition after 6 months. So I want to be a founder. I want to get clarity on my long-term goals. I want to just become a business professional.
Hmm.
Right. Like that's the foundation of why you're here. Right. Um, I'm in this community to network and build a web app in 30 days. Right. I am in this community to do X. Like everyone needs a mission statement kind of when they join a company. Like, why am I here? Right.
Hmm.
Not just as a founder, as a builder, you need to think about why am I doing this, but that should resonate with your member. Each community member should have a clear answer to know, like, why am I here? Why am I part of this community? And if they don't, they likely will not be active, or they'll likely churn, or they'll likely cause growth, or like they'll likely be unhappy because they likely have not thought of that question, or before joining or before committing their time, whatever it is. So
Hmm.
that,
So, not attaching any labels, just going out of the conversation right now.
yeah.
Uh, but I think you are an extrovert. And would you say it's important for a community manager to be an extrovert?
See, I think today's world, extrovert and introvert, I don't think these terms apply. I could be wrong. This is my personal observation of the last 5 years of the internet, and how things have evolved. Um, right, because I think we have different personas now.
Hmm.
We have a work persona, we have a persona that we are. I don't know, like, if you call back to that being a team player sprint, which, Sham runs or Sham ran. I don't know if he said this phrase with you guys, but there's this phrase that he uses, which is called the you that you know is not worth knowing. It's this
Hmm.
quote by Sigmund Freud. And what that really comes down to is that you are different people from in the eyes of different people. Like, you have different personas, and this is not like that deep psychology of like multiple personality disorder. It's not that level. It's a very simple thing that I think most of us go through in life. Like, I think we have different personas. Like the way you know me, or my relationship with you, Ritik, is very different from, say, the guy I grew up with, my school friend. Because I think if you meet him, he'll probably tell you that I'm an introvert, but you will consider me an extrovert because of what I do and what I do. So I don't think these, rules necessarily, or these frames are good frames to look at the world today. However, that being said, social anxiety does it, right? And I think that, social anxiety, being shy, um, are things that people do deal. And I also don't think I think if you're an extrovert, or if you're someone who is, I don't think extrovert is the right word, but I think, again, to be a good community manager, you need to have good social skills. I don't think you need to be an
Hmm.
extrovert. I don't think you need to be the life of the party, right? I think you just need to have a good amount of social skills, and you are able to hold different kinds of conversations, and you're able to be like a good, you need a few tenants. Like you need to be a good listener. You need to be able to have good conversations. You need to be curious about people. You need to be able, but you have to have an interest in people. Like you have to have an interest in people and having conversations and bringing people together. Right. And those are the spaces that we kind of express ourselves a lot in there. Like, for me, this problem is interesting enough that I want to adopt this persona and have conversations with people. Right. But I would say if you threw me in a community of, um, I think if you threw me in a community of, say, um, let me think of something else that I'm interested in, but I wouldn't necessarily be as active. Like, yeah, I think if you threw me in a community of, say, musicians, right, or people who make music, and I would probably be a little more soft spoken then.
Hmm.
Because then my mindset like, okay, I don't know enough here, I want to probably learn. So I don't think I'd be able to be a good community manager for, say, a music community, because I don't necessarily understand all the problems that they deal with, or the challenges that they have. I might not be able to hold a conversation really well. I might not understand the nuances of that world really well. So I might not be able, because I don't have a lot of fundamental knowledge of what goes on there. I might be interested in being a member, but if I have to tell me to be, hey, I want to be a community builder, and this is like, these are 100 musicians, I want to build a community for them, and starting off with 10, I probably would have a harder time, and that would maybe be a bit more out of my comfort zone, right? I likely would be a little more shy and not know, like, probably spend months figuring out and not be able to do that really well. But here, this is like plays to a lot of my strengths, because here, like, I'm able to adopt this persona where I
Hmm.
can have multiple conversations, because I've been in this field, I've been in startups, I've been in the industry for like 6 to 7 years now. I've worked in the upskilling space, I've worked in education, right? I've worked in community building. So this comes a lot more, like, I've learned to become a lot more like, I figured out my social skills that I need for this, for the Stoa community, say, so to speak, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's more around that, right? Like, what are the things you are interested in or passionate about? Like, for example, you might be an introvert, but you can probably speak for hours about AI, and you're seeking, people like, I want to be in a room with people who can talk about AI as much as,
Hmm.
right? That might be a need you have, and in that space, you might, if someone else saw you from the outside, they would look at you and be like, wow, this dude's an extrovert here, right? Like, or they might want to put that label on
Hmm.
you, because they're
I
seeing
think.
like you just have high energy, you're feeding off that energy, right? Like, and I think it's that, it's zones that you have.
Hmm.
If you saw me in the office space, man, like, if you see me in the office, I probably talk to 4 people. Like, out of work, like non-work conversations, it's probably 3 to 4 people that I actually have non-work conversations. But
Hmm.
work conversations, if people saw me, I'm just talking about ideas, and I'm writing things down. I'm saying, hey, let's do this, let's do that, let's do that, because I'm in that zone. But I think, like, I mean, let me be also vulnerable a bit here, right? Like, I think, even in my team, in my workspace, um, lot of people are very into food in Stoa, like in the Stoa team, right? A lot of them have very specific opinions about where do they eat in Bangalore, South Indian, North Indian, all these things. And I'm the quieter one in all those conversations, because I have very little to like contribute. I feel awkward, right? Like, I feel like, Arey, wow, these guys know so much more than me. I have nothing to contribute here. Like this, the best thing I can do is probably ask questions, but like very little of this is relatable to me.
Hmm.
And it makes, like, I feel a bit like an outsider, not outsider necessarily, but I'm like, I'm enjoying, I'm happy that they are having this conversation, but I don't feel like I'm part of that. You know, I'm not a foodie when I think, like, oh, I thought I was a foodie. No, I'm definitely not a foodie. These guys are like actually
Hmm.
foodie. And if this is what it means to be a foodie, I don't think I can be this. Like, I don't have those tenets. Like,
Hmm.
but someone wants to talk about like community building. Like, I mean, we've been speaking for hours. Like, I can talk about this for hours, right? Like, I mean, yesterday I spoke to some. So it's that, man. It's like, what are those things that I think introvert and extrovert are outdated terms today.
Yeah.
I think it's more about, do you how much is your social battery, and what are really the things that you care about. I'll
Actually.
tell you I'll tell you how I found this about myself as well, because I think I have good people skills. Like, it's a strength of mine. I was in sales though for the longest time, and I was a horrible salesman when I was a salesperson, right? I was quite bad at it. And I was like, fuck, this sucks because I have this great skill where I can make conversation with people and make friends and get people comfortable with me. But I suck at closing sales. And I was like, fuck, what do I do? I'm great at relationship building. And I was like, fuck, I don't want to be customer support because you can't really do that there. Right. And lucky enough, I was able to find like, yeah, community is a space that, finds that line where it's a good combination of my social skills. It even brings a rule building thing, process building things to it, project management skills as well. So I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I like this space, right? Like, this is something I can do, right? So I think it's also about discovering, knowing yourself, uh,
Yeah.
as well.
I think it also ties back to our early conversation about having fun, essentially. Uh,
Hmm.
Definitely
Very
painkillers
true, man.
is an advantage.
Yeah, the fun part makes all the pain worth it, man.
Yeah,
Like I've had hard conversations with, like even within the Stoa community, right? Like someone has argued with me about, hey, why you deleted my message, or hey, why you did do this, oh, hey, I was right, or no, like I didn't mean this. Like there have been issues, but yeah, I mean, it's the fun parts that keep it going, not so much
definitely.
those
So
tougher spots. Yeah.
that brings us to the end of our session. Thank
You have a hard job editing this. I don't know how much you're going to keep also. I don't know if this is even listenable to someone from the outside.
It might be after some time of editing. So, thanks a lot
Yeah.
for your time.
Sure, man,
If,
Ritik.
if
Yeah.
there's one liner advice, I think we have covered all the advice and aspects of
Mm,
community building. With one line, you
yeah.
would sum up your advice to someone who's an aspiring community manager.
Uh, have good taste. Like build your taste. Whatever it is that you're consuming, right? For whatever community you want to build, whether it is uh whether it is music, movies, like just improve your taste there, whether if you're reading books, even watching podcasts, or even what you're doing even in your say your workspace, right? Like just improve your taste because you're what you like think about it, right? Like you're kind of also a gatekeeper in some ways. So what you can expose more people to in a community, I think the greater it is. And that's why other people also feel like they can also contribute. So I think if a skill that that doesn't get spoken about in community management a lot is you as a community manager need to keep pushing your boundaries of what you consume. Like in terms of just quality, right? Like just consuming more and more quality thing, right? Which also pushes you a lot. And
Yeah,
I think having good taste also helps you grow better.
all right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean like English, right? Like I think in India,
Hmm.
people think taste, they think like, oh, you need to consume like high quality English content. Like no man, it's like anything, man. Like like consume the top people in those fields, right? Like if you're watching movies, watch the best like directors or writers, right? If you're listening to music, right? Like watch the best, like listen to the best musician, right? Like A.R. Rahman, Indian Ocean, right? If you're listening to India, right? If you're watching the best directors, right? Like if read the uh, read PR documents of the best founders or builders, right? Like or emails to their companies, like Jeff Bezos' email, right? Like
Hmm.
right, don't get too influenced by influencers or there's a lot of noise that exists today, but
Yeah.
and it's so you need to keep pushing yourself on just consuming better things. Read the best writers, not like a founder who just as part of his personal brand strategy has released a book,
Hmm.
right? With some 10 hacks on how to build a company, right? Like read people who have actually built legacy businesses and have written like about it later. Read right, right. And read things or do things that will make you like push you outside of your comfort zone. That make you like things that usually scare you are likely the things that you have to do. Sorry, these are not like one-liners. It's like
No, no,
I
no.
don't have
That's
one-liners.
that's
I'm so
that's great.
scattered. Like one of the things I think as a community manager, I've seen a common trait. A lot of community managers are these scatterbrained, and I think that's like that makes me horrible for podcasts because I can talk about like I'll go on different tangents of
No, no,
like different
that brings
like.
you very good for podcast actually. Because people need these sort of deep conversations and get to know more about stuff. Because some people don't like to read.
Hmm. If there's like, who's your audience for your podcast, by the way?
My audience is very wide. Right now, I'm covering
Hmm,
the aspects of marketing. The first five
hmm.
episodes are tying back to marketing, part of marketing.
But largely this will be younger folks, right? I'm
Yeah,
guessing early career.
yeah.
If I could share just one more like anecdote, right? If there's anyone listening to this and thinking about and reach the end, or maybe we can clip this separately, right? Like, just going back to that careers point, right? I think when you're thinking about your careers, I know there are a lot of factors of like luck, privilege, and there are factors that makes it maybe difficult for you to do the things that you like whether it is quitting your job or pursuing your passion. There's a lot of things that you hear around this, right? uh, the advice that I, or not advice, but just frame I would like to give a lot of young people out there is, your career is like, again, going back to that, your career is the longest thing that you do. So even if you're thinking like, oh, I have 5 years of experience now, I'm late in my career, like, it's like if you have 5 to 6 years of experience, you're just 1/6 into your career, right? So if anyone, if you have dreams, or you've had dreams of doing things, think about what are those fundamental things that inspired you in your dreams. You'll likely find a job that will allow you to do that. And I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, two things that I wanted to become, I remember, was like detective, because I used to read a lot of Batman. Like, oh, I want to become a detective. And the other thing was, I want to be a writer, because I used to read a lot of novels. And now, of course, life goes through different things. And life will take you through pains, and you will danda to karna hai sabko. But I've been lucky enough that over time I've found things that let me use the fundamental skills required there. So, for example, I get to work on solving problems, which is another way of like looking at being a detective. Like you have kind of a case, and you got to figure out how to find a solution to that or a problem, or like who has done it. Like, so think about, when you're thinking about these dreams that you had as a kid, or these aspirations that you have, think about what is that fundamental thing that attracted you to that. For me, writing was a form of, I of course the goal was, okay, novel likhna hai, I need to be a published writer. But at the core of it, what I enjoyed about it is like, oh, I can morph language to craft an interesting thing and
Mm,
convince people of a different perspective. And I get to do that. I actually get to do the two things, now 8 years or 9 years into my career. And this will change, of course, right? Like, I don't think I'm also set in stone with where my career is or going
yeah.
to be. And so that's, I think, what I would like to tell young people, be kind to yourself as well, right? Like, work hard, hustle, do what you need to do, but also be kind to yourself. And, a lot of these, like, look at the fundamental things that attract you to things, and be okay with change. Be okay that your goals and your interests also might change over time. So be kind to yourself that way. Hmm? Yeah. So TK, last Gyan, like that was the
अरे
last thing.
नहीं नहीं, thanks a lot for your time, यार. I
Yeah,
think
man.
I
Yeah,
took a
man.
lot of your time.